Guideline, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, the motion is carried. Right, that takes us on to declaration of councillor conflicts of interest. Are there any new conflicts that councillors wish to declare this afternoon, or ones that particularly relate to the agenda that we're discussing? There's not, thank you. So I'm sure that if anything arises, you will make sure that we're aware of any potential conflict there. So beginning with confirmation of minutes, we have 3 sets of minutes to confirm. First one is the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held on Tuesday, 14 September. Would somebody like to move that be a true and correct record? Move, Councillor Dixon. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Reid, thank you. Are there any alterations required to that record? Or not? I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, the motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Confirmation of the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of council held on Wednesday, 22 September. Would somebody like to move that that be seen as a true and correct record? Councillor Grant, thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Phillips, thank you. Are there any alterations required to that record? There are not. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, the motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. And confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of the Community Strategy Committee held on Wednesday, 22 September. Somebody like to move that be seen as a true and correct record? Councillor Reid, thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Bolger, thank you. All those in favour, please. Oh, is there any alteration? There's not. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, the motion is carried. So any recommendations contained within that report, somebody like to move that they be confirmed? Councillor Hosted.
Is this the point we get an opportunity to discuss those, or is it come next?
Yeah, it is.
Like, it's probably just it's just a hardy annual of mine around predetermining what the annual plan contains. So at item 5, event strategy, I would prefer, and I'll be prepared to move the recommendation, provided it says that the funding sought is approved via the annual plan process, and the second item is of 27440 is for consideration in the 22-23 annual plan. Often we find ourselves in an annual plan with a list of items that we've already approved and no opportunity to discuss. So no issues with the strategy. Just think the funding needs to be managed at the annual plan time.
Okay, so just for my clarity, you're making a change to the third recommendation, is that right?
So the second recommendation, that the event strategy be approved and implemented with funding aspects to be considered at future annual plans. And that the third item, that funding to the value of 27440 be included add for consideration in the 22-23 annual plan.
Okay, so you're moving
I'd like to, yes.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Grant, is that right?
Your Worship, I'd like a comment from the Chief Executive, particularly around the 27K.
So I'll open it up to the Chief Executive now. I just needed to get a seconder for that before we go any further. So I take the point that you're making, Cliff, and it has been seconded by Councillor Grant. And Steve, just the ramifications of that alteration. Do you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. No real issues. I completely understand where Councillor Highstead's coming from, and to be fair, as he said, he has raised this concern before. The issue really is you're endorsing it in isolation, and you obviously think it's a good idea, and we all do. But I also take the point that you're doing so not knowing what other priorities may present themselves, and you may be forced to have to reorder those priorities if there are more bigger ticket items that you didn't expect that come through in the next few months in preparation for next year's draft annual plan. So this amendment, in my view, Your Worship, still does justice to the spirit of the committee's thinking, but also leaves you some room to manoeuvre should some unexpected circumstances arise between now and probably April next year when we do our draft annual plan.
So Councillor McPhail, as chair of the committee, you got your hand up?
Yes, just through Your Worship, a comment. Am I coming through clearly?
Yep. Well, clearish.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with what Councillor Highstead has stated there. It is one of those matters that we have discussed, bringing the working committee's recommendations to council, and we have workshopped around that value there. And it is accepted that obviously endorsing it in isolation, as the CEO indicates, there could be other priorities. So I think it's around the fact that when we are bringing these matters through from the other committees, that we should ensure that we are applying the correct application, so it does fit within that annual plan. I know that we did, when that amount was discussed, that we did look at that it was still being brought to the main council for recommendation and or endorsement or application. That's my only comment.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, the motion is carried. Are there any other alterations required to the recommendations contained within that report? There's not. Okay. Oh, Councillor Highstead?
No, not a change, but I just think the item 3, the over 80s parking permit, is that got the mileage it should have in terms of public? But that's a very, very good initiative of this committee and great for the community. Where I've been asleep at the wheel, I just haven't seen too much of that in the media. The council doing good work and the committee doing good work.
I think we can always get more profile, but I'm sure that it has been out there. Maybe you just don't meet the age profile, Councillor Highstead. I don't know.
Your Worship, potentially there could be a new ambassador or patron of the service.
It could well be.
And the councillor that's wanting to champion its publicity.
Could I possibly assist Councillor Highstead there? We did have a article, or there was a spread, or Ready for Living had a spread in the Ensign which featured a story about it, and we just have held off pushing it out until we got the discs created and the paperwork and all the process behind it. So now that we can, once we get those done, we'll be pressing go on any publicity.
Okay, right. So that brings us back to the adoption of that particular committee with the one change. So would somebody like, would somebody like to move the adoption of the recommendations contained within the Community Strategy Committee, including the change that we've just made? Move Councillor Phillips, seconded Councillor Dixon. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, the motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. I think that brings us to the end of the minutes that we need to consider and brings us on to urgent late business. Is there any urgent late business that we need to be discussing today? There's not. Thank you. And Rural Halls and Domains Subcommittee, we have a recommendation or two recommendations of the meeting of that particular committee, that the minutes be received and the recommendations contained within the minutes be ratified. Would somebody like to move that be confirmed? Councillor Gardine and seconded Councillor Grant. Thank you. Any questions or comment? Councillor McPhail, you've got your hand up? No, it's gone. Councillor Gardine?
Just one thing to note is the time, 5 minutes flat. Finishing and starting times.
Are you suggesting that's good or bad? Okay, yeah, good point. Okay, put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, the motion is carried. Thank you. Right, so that brings us on to cemetery policy. And we have an item here that's been raised in response to a letter that's come from Mrs. Margaret Puller with regard to booking cemetery spots at the Pukerau Cemetery. And we have a report from our man on the spot, Keith McRoby. And I think that outlines exactly the way forward, certainly in my mind, Keith. But do you want to make any comment on this at this point?
Through your worship, I think the committee, or the trust involved with Pukerau, it's very much a community-based group, and they're quite an active group led by Margaret Puller, and it's essentially, I guess, most of the group is sort of the descendants of the Pullers and the Trapskys, and so they've had a long history with that particular site, and they, I guess they're keen to open the opportunities to some of their descendants and family members going forward, really. So it's a bit of a diversion away from our policy, but it's quite a different situation to the three main cemeteries, really, and so that's I think it's got to be considered on that basis too, really. So.
Thank you, Keith. Steve, do you want to make any comment before I open it for discussion?
No, I'm fine, Your Worship.
Righto. So open for discussion, councillors, and or recommendation, which is contained on page 28. Councillor Reid.
I'm happy to move the recommendation, Your Worship. I think this group have worked really hard. They've made lots of changes out there in a very positive way, and I agree with the recommendation. I'm quite happy to move it.
Right, do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Grant, thank you. Right. Councillor Hysted, then Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, just through you, Your Worship, I just have a question for Keith. What does controlled pre-purchase mean? Just the definition of controlled. I wasn't familiar with that, just curious.
Oh, okay. I think with our main policy, we've got basically if a deceased, we have a deceased person, if their family can currently book an adjoining plot, so that's a controlled situation, really. And I think the risk of, if you were to open this up with all the cemeteries, we would have lots of pre-purchase sites, and it would be a really difficult situation to manage, really. So and I think going back in time, I think was an issue a few years ago where a burial took place on a site that had been pre-sold, and the mechanism wasn't in place to kind of manage that, so it becomes a pretty embarrassing situation, really. So, yeah.
Okay, so controlled means specific to Pukerau. That's
in the sense, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
And this whole policy we're talking about now is specific to Pukerau, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Dixon, then Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Worship. I'd just like to say that I do support the proposal of the Pukerau Trust as well, because I feel it sits outside our controlled at present policy, and they have looked after that cemetery particularly well and done a lot of work out there. Just offering my support.
Thank you. Councillor Grant.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm the same as the two previous councillors. It's a lovely letter by Margaret, and they have done a huge amount of work. Also good on behalf of to Keith, the fact that there is going to be a full report coming to council at some stage regarding the other cemeteries in our district. There was a few years ago an issue in the Eastern Cemetery where a young person was died accidentally, and his parents wanted to buy a plot either side of him. The policy didn't allow that, but we worked through that one, and that was a one-off situation. But I'm guessing here that next year, when this report comes to council with all the different scenarios and also your cultural things that may happen, we may have to change one or two things. But no, I'll fully support this one.
Right. Okay. Is there any other councillors wish to make any comment? There's not. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, the motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. That brings us on to item 7 and the Sport New Zealand Rural Travel Fund and the allocation of funding for this particular period. And the recommendation is that the report be received. Do I have a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Highstead, do I have a seconder? Councillor Davis, thank you. It's open for discussion. Is there any discussion from councillors on that? Any questions? There's not. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, the motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Right, item 8, report on the abatement notice received for stormwater discharge into Faulkner Creek and a draft stormwater bylaw, something of quite a bit of substance. And I'll ask for comment firstly from the Chief Executive and then from the Three Waters Asset Manager, if I can, on the way forward with this particular issue. So, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. I'll defer in the main to Matt Bayliss, the Three Waters Manager, but it's clear with the abatement notice issued upon us that the existing framework we have to dealing with this is inadequate. And whilst the Environment Southland said we want you to put in place a policy framework to manage these discharges, our analysis has come to the conclusion that really a bylaw which has some teeth in terms of if we get to that point, potential prosecution will hopefully ensure compliance and improvements that we want to see on these properties. Because to be candid, the council at the moment is a bit of like a sitting duck. It's receiving discharges from properties and has no meaningful way of controlling it, yet is a sitting duck in terms of facing the regulatory might of Environment Southland, which of course has been responding to complaints about discharges into the river.
Thank you. So Matt.
Yeah, thank you. And through Your Worship, obviously we received an abatement notice earlier this year regarding the discharge into Faulkner Creek, and as a result of that we've done quite a bit of work trying to understand the issue and doing a bit of research into how we can manage the issue and things since then, and as I think Steve covered off, we think that a bylaw is required to manage this. I guess stormwater quality is probably a bit of a new space that we're moving into in terms of improving it. It's predominantly historically the focus has been more on wastewater discharges, but stormwater is becoming more and more of a priority. I guess the research that we've found is that in that particular catchment, there's no one particular property that's causing the issue. It's multiple properties, and I guess what our understanding is that the full removal of the suspended solids and the discharge is going to be quite a challenging process, and it could potentially require multiple treatment steps to do that. So I think it's going to be a bit of a iterative approach, and we're going to have to target the worst areas first, and then as we move along, the quality and the discharge will slowly get better. We do also think that there's a need to look at our existing discharge consent. Some of the conditions in there are quite onerous and potentially very difficult to achieve. So we think there's value in revisiting that and seeing if we can't get some required consent conditions that, while we certainly still need to make improvements. They might be sort of more realistically achievable if we can get them amended.
Thank you.
Yeah, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Matt. And obviously he's going to have quite a change in the way that we manage water in that particular catchment. And I think it's fairly obvious that there does need to be a change. So whether this is the right way to go forward, I guess, is the real issue for us now. And what's being proposed here is subject to consultation. So I think if I'm right in thinking, Matt, it's a month's consultation, is that right? For landowners and affected people in that catchment to consult and let us know their feelings. So just wondering about timing for that consultation process. If this was to be adopted today as the way forward, what would the consultation process look like? And I'm just in mind of, Christmas is not too far away from where we're at now, and everybody gets pretty busy at that time. So I think it is a reasonably important process that we're embarking on here, and we need to give people as much opportunity as we can to have input into that. So I'm not sure whether you're the right person to answer that question, Matt, or whether Steve is.
Through your worship, I can answer a couple of those questions, and I might pass the communications manager as well, because we have had some discussions around it. So I guess the first point is the bylaw will apply to the entire urban networks of both Gore and Mataura. So in terms of consultation, we'll be consulting with the entire urban area. Although in saying that, obviously the issue that we have at the moment is in that Falconer Road catchment, so they'll be sort of the higher priority properties in terms of applying the bylaw. And yeah, I have had a discussion with the communications manager, and we're thinking that we'd have the consultation period, which is 20 working days as a minimum, prior to Christmas, potentially with it closing sort of early or mid-December. And then if there was a requirement for a hearing, we would have that probably late January or something like that. There aren't any particular time pressures around the consultation, so if there was a preference to delay it all until the new year, then we could potentially do that. Yeah, Sonia, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Through the chair, thank you, Matt. Yes, he's right. We could, depending on what the council prefers, obviously people won't be engaging with us second week December onwards, to be fair. So we would need to do the community consultation. We'll ask for call for submissions in November. Failing that, you're probably looking at, if council wanted to, I think February, because January most people are disengaged or still on holiday. So you would carry out your submission process February with a hearing after that.
Thank you. Okay, Neville.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just got a question for Matt in regards to, would it not be a district-wide bylaw, because there is Waikaka and could possibly affect Mandeville in some aspects too?
Your Worship. Yeah, yes, sorry, Neville, you're correct. Yeah, so it also applies to the stormwater networks in Waikaka, Mandeville and Pukerua. So it's wherever we've got a reticulated stormwater network.
Thanks for that clarification. Councillor Hosted?
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. I agree with the recommendation, but I'm just reflecting on what's happening in the rural community with catchment groups, and wonder, on a more positive note, whether there's an opportunity for the council to work with industry or landowners in that area. There's some quite large scale gravelled tenant or landowners in that area to facilitate the formation of a landowner-led catchment group. I think that could be a positive step the council could take to bring out some leadership as these businesses embark on the resolution of what they have to do in that area. So if there was a will, I'd be quite keen to see that incorporated in the recommendation.
Very good idea. Thanks for raising that, Brett. I think it's excellent.
Shall I move it?
Well, we can put it into the recommendation at the end of the discussion. Glenys.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just wanting clarity around whether it's School District Council's responsibility to mitigate sediment from water streams from private property, because I understood it was Environment Southland's role.
Through Your Worship. So where a property discharges into our reticulated stormwater network, we hold the resource consent for the resulting discharge into the environment. So it becomes our responsibility to manage any private property discharging into that network. That's different to a property that is discharging directly to the environment from their property, and that would be an Environment Southland process to manage.
Okay, thank you. And I was also wondering why it's not practical to sample the water upstream and downstream of the sump guards. Is it cost or?
Essentially, I guess it's cost. There's no sample points. So it would be a matter of installing dedicated sampling points and access points, which, while you could do it, it would be very costly to do per sump. Yeah, so I guess essentially it comes down to cost. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gardine and then Councillor McFarlane.
Just a question for Matt, through Your Worship. How does this apply to our gravel roads in the urban area and the rural area? Will we have to tar seal existing gravel roads in the urban area or going forward, or what's going to happen there?
Through Your Worship, yes. So I guess this bylaw doesn't specifically apply to it, but I guess the principles do, and I'm not sure how Environment Southland plan on tackling that issue, but potentially it is going to become an issue. Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly how it's going to be handled going forward.
Okay, Councillor McFarlane and Councillor Dixon, you've still got your hand up.
Yes, just through Your Worship, I think Councillor Gardine's covered off what I was going to say, but we are, and I do support, obviously we need to do something here, but we're obviously in the situation of creating a bylaw because we've breached a law where we've been served with abatement, and we create another bylaw where if it gets breached, we make a person will be served with an abatement. So it's probably lawmaking at its best, and it is required. Which leads on to the fact that I think Councillor Highstead's discussion around water users groups and any assistance that we can give. There's some very, very strong groups, particularly in the rural areas, around things that can improve. And I think we could apply that to that industrial area, any assistance that we could come through. And I know through the community strategies group, we've had presentations from some working groups very close to the Gore boundary there, which we may be able to facilitate further.
Thank you, Councillor McFarlane. Councillor Bolger.
Yeah, I just want a wee bit of clarity from Matt. The photograph shows problems with sediment into Faulkner Creek. So some of our stormwater system discharges into Faulkner Creek. And also another question, if there is a business which could be contributing to that, how would we, if we had knowledge of that, I'd imagine we'd have to approach them and have them to try and do something inside their boundary. Thank you.
Through Your Worship. Yeah, so I guess to answer your first question, yeah, so the sampling that we have done has shown that there's quite an increase in sediment in Falconer Creek downstream of our stormwater discharge points compared to upstream. So, the evidence is quite clear that there is sediment coming from our discharge into Falconer Creek. The second part of your question, so where there are specific properties discharging a significant amount of sediment into the stormwater, we'd work with those property owners to come to a solution. I suspect each property the solution for each property could be different, there's a number of different approaches that you can take to manage the sediment runoff, and so it'll be about finding a solution that fits each individual property rather than a one-size-fits-all.
Still another question. That sedimentation, is that coming from our roading network, because the reports highlighted that, or is it also coming from businesses who are discharging into the wastewater system that goes into our stormwater? Or were they separate?
Through your worship, so it's a combination of both. I suspect the large majority of it is coming from private property, but there is certainly a component that is coming from our road reserve as well.
I think I possibly can help you somewhere. I'll have a chat to you offline.
All right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Grant.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just sort of answering Councillor Bolger's last question, there is a large area of businesses in that region that don't have hard seal. During heavy rain, it just turns to mud, and there's quite a few of them in there. There's in and around that area, and that's your major issue, I believe. And this report has alluded to that. So that's it's a case of either the report is pretty substantial in the fact that it gives us a way forward. So I'm I'd move the recommendation of the report, to be honest.
Okay, so you're moving the recommendation. Do you include the idea that Councillor Highstead had with regard to working with landowners to form a catchment group?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you could, and that's a brilliant idea by Councillor Highstead. It's you would form a commercial instead of because there is one for the area of the rural ratepayers. If you form the commercial or urban area because there are a lot of those guys, and one of the companies in there that may be one of your biggest players is a transport operator. So they may be able to solve quite a few of their own problems.
Okay, thank you.
Your Worship, the transport operator comes under considerable scrutiny from Environment Southland because they're a fertiliser store, and they've had inspections ad nauseum in the past. So I'm not sure that, or I'm confident that they are containing their own potential contribution on site.
Okay, take that point. We have a seconder for the amended set of motions. Councillor Highstead, thank you. Okay, councillors, is there any further comment before I put those motions? If not, I'll put the motions. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, the motion is carried. Thank you, councillors.
Right.
Councillor Grant.
Your Worship. Just before that's been moved, but we haven't actually said about the time frame to go out for submissions. We haven't sort of confirmed that, and I believe Matt and Sonia were sort of asking the council. I believe it should be held off till February. It's now October. By the time you get it ready, it'll be November. A lot of businesses in that area will be gearing up flat out, doing everything before they can to finish before Christmas. So I think February would be a more suitable time.
So just a question with regard to the attitude of the regulator, if we were to put this off for another 3 months. And I'm not sure who's going to answer that, either Matt or Steve.
Through your worship, so the abatement notice requires us to prepare the appropriate policy framework ready for consultation by January 2022. Okay. So we would be meeting that requirement. Obviously, they'd be keen for us to get things underway earlier, but I don't see too much of an issue delaying it.
I think that makes sense. Everybody comfortable with that approach? Okay, I see a lot of nodding. Thanks. Okay. Well, brings us on to our next item, which is one that seems to be on every agenda. Doesn't matter where you are these days, it seems to be on every agenda, and that's a Three Water Reform update. And we have an update from the Chief Executive, which also includes a letter that's gone from this council to the Minister. And I understand the Minister will be making some recommendations to Cabinet, if not before. Steve, do you want to make any comment?
Not really, Worship. I think all I hope is that the letter suitably reflects the council's mood and concerns at the last meeting. And as you said, Your Worship, we wait now with interest the government's response, which we're told is expected by the end of this month.
Okay. Any comments or questions from councillors with regard to Three Waters? Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to mention that given all the information that councillors have been inundated with and the workshopping that we've done around this, I think the ratepayers of the district can be assured that the letter that went to Minister Mahuta was quite concise and clear in our opinion of the Three Waters reform. I just think if they really want to read all of it in detail, they'll find it on our council's website, and it was a good letter.
Okay, so would somebody like to move the recommendation and the letter be noted and endorsed? Move Councillor Reid, seconded Councillor Dixon. Thank you. Any further comment on that one? There's not. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, the motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. And we have a report here with regard to health and safety. A report from Susan. Do you want to make any comment to this, Susan?
I've got nothing further to add, Your Worship. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, I think it's reasonably straightforward. Would somebody like to move that be received? Councillor Bolger, seconder for that, please. Councillor Grant, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, the motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. And we have one final item of business on the open part of this agenda, and that is the issuing of a staff warrant and authorisation. And that's coming from the Human Resource Manager. Do you want to make any comment to this one, Susan? I think it's reasonably straightforward.
Yes, it is, Your Worship. It's just something that we're required to issue the staff member with so that he can carry out his enforcement or compliance duties as part of his role.
Okay. Thank you. Open for discussion and or recommendation. So are you moving that, Bronwyn?
Yeah, I'm happy to move that recommendation, Your Worship.
Seconded, Councillor Gardine. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, the motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. So that brings us to the end of the open section of the council business for today. We now move into public excluded session, which will be discussing matters such as confirmation of minutes and other business relating to things such as the Community Networking Trust, land purchase for treatment, water treatment update, minutes, the Audit and Risk Committee, and Deloitte audit findings. Would somebody like to move that we go into committee, please?
I'll move.
Move, councillor Bolger. Do I have a seconder?